Encounter Conference is the largest annual one-day educational event in Anglo-Jewry. The first conference was held on Sunday, 1st of December 1996 at the Institute of Education in central London and attracted 1,500 participants from across the religious spectrum. International experts on Jewish thought spoke on contemporary issues, including Jewish feminism, faith, medical ethics and spirituality. Chief Rabbi Dr. Jonathan Sachs opened the conference with an inspiring address on the theme of the conference, Judaism Faces Modernity.
Kvod Rabbi Rashi Medinat Yisrael, Rabbi Lau, Dayanim, Rabbanim, distinguished speakers from across the world, ladies and gentlemen, wow. I must say, when Rabbi Roll said, let's get a few friends together and let's learn a bit, I didn't know it was going to turn out quite like this. But it is a thrilling, exhilarating, magnificent day. And I think this is going to be, and live in the memory as one of the great moments of Anglo-Jewry. People have come today from all over the place, from Israel, from Germany, from Glasgow, Manchester, Leeds, Birmingham, Cambridge, Kent, and Golders Green. 1,500 people, hundreds of them turned away. And I want, before further ado, to say that though many, many people have helped today make this day possible, I think we should begin the day by paying our tribute to the young man whose idea it was, who saw the vision, who brought it to reality, Rabbi Yisrael Roll. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm just, you have to start the day. A Jewish way to start the day is to be a bissel zerfrunzelt. Everyone else had somebody to introduce. Who do I introduce? And the short answer is, it is my task to introduce the day. Because what has brought us together today? And the answer is that we have come together to share in that unique, that quintessential Jewish experience, the experience of Torah. We have come to listen, to speak, to question, to argue, and to debate, in short, to learn. And in so doing, you and I are about to take our part in probably the greatest conversation in the history of human civilization, the conversation of the Jewish people with the source of our inspiration, the Torah itself, to which every single generation of Jews, now stretching almost 4,000 years, each generation has had its voice, has added its commentary, and the time has come to add our own. Think about this. The Torah describes that incredible, unique, formative moment when the Jewish people stood at Mount Sinai and heard the Torah for the first time. And the Torah itself describes that moment in these words. It says it was a kol gadol v'lo yasaf, which could mean that it was a great voice which never occurred again. However, the Targum translates it slightly differently. It says, Kol Gadol V'lo Yasaf means that the Torah was a great sound which never stopped, never ceased. Now what a momentous leap of faith that was. The Targum, after all, was written over 2,000 years ago at a time when Jews faced, as Jews face today, enormous threats and challenges of assimilation, acculturation, disaffiliation. In those days, Greek civilization was at its height, and many Jews were Hellenizing, were becoming un-Jewish. And yet somehow, the sages knew that as long as human civilization lasted, as long as people walked this earth, the Torah would be a kol gadol v'lo yasaf, a great voice that never ceased to intrigue and inspire. And you and I, by coming here, have proved that today. And why? Because somehow in an obscure way, we know that this book, this heritage, this Torah holds the key to who we are. And we have always studied it with passion. I still remember one of the great culture shocks of my life. I just finished university before I went for the first time to yeshiva. For 3 years, I had studied almost every day in the university library in Cambridge. Now, does any of you know what it is like to study in a university library? Complete silence. Everyone's locked away on their own with a little pile of books. No noise. If somebody coughs, you risk giving everyone a heart attack. If somebody speaks, that's it, you're finished, excommunicated. So after 3 years of this, I thought that is what it is to study. Then I went to yeshiva. I walked through the door of the Beit Midrash and there was a noise like somebody scored the winning goal at Highbury. There was passion, there were people standing up and shouting and grabbing each other by the lapels, and they were living all over again those great debates that never ceased in Jewish history, the arguments between Hillel and Shammai, Rav and Shmuel, Abaye and Rava. And then I realized this is Jewish learning. This is the Torah which was given with letters of fire on parchment of fire, and this was the life of Torah. You know, to be a Jew is to argue. I think you probably know that by now. You know, other people, other civilizations, they have things called conversations. We only have machlokes, you know, that's our conversational art form. I remember a wonderful story told by Alan Dershowitz, the American civil rights lawyer. He tells the story of a man who comes to a new arrival in a Jewish community. He comes to shul for the first Shabbos, welcomed, made to feel at home, and everything in the shul is beautiful until they get to Kriyas HaTorah. Now, you probably know that some people have a custom of standing up during Kriyas HaTorah, and other people have a custom of sitting down during Kriyas HaTorah. But in this shul, something remarkable happened. Half the community stood up, half the community remained resolutely sitting down. The half who were standing up were shrying Gewalt at all the people who were sitting down. Up because don't you know that when you read the Torah, you got to stand up? And the people who were sitting down were saying, Amaratzim. Then you know when you read the Torah, you're supposed to sit down. Total pandemonium, civil war after the reading of the Torah. Everything nice and quiet again. The same thing happened a second week, a third week. It was driving this man mad. He wanted to come for a bit of peace and quiet. To daven, instead he gets around. So he decides, I must find out. What is the halacha? What's the din? What's the law? In this particular town, there's no Rav, so he has to travel a long way to find the nearest Rav. He finds one, very sagacious, saintly, scholarly Rav. And he says, Rabbi, I need to ask you a very, very important question. Ask, says the Rav. Tell me, Rav, he says, when you read the Torah, do you stand up? And the Rav thinks and he shakes his head and he strokes his beard and says, no, this is not the tradition. So he says, in that case, Rav, when you read the Torah, do you sit down? And the Rav shakes his head and says, no, this is not the tradition. So the man says, Rav, you have to help me here, because in our shul, half the people stand up, half the people sit down, and each side shouts and screams at one another. And the Rav nods his head and says, yeah, that is the tradition. Well, things haven't changed, but what is the solution? The solution, ladies and gentlemen, is very simple. The Torah contains a very cryptic verse in the Seder of Chukas. It says, Al ken ye'amer b'sefer melchamot Hashem, thus it shall be said thus it is said in the book of the wars of the Lord, et vahev b'sufa. And these words are very difficult to understand. However, the Talmud says the following. It says, yes, Jews are a passionate people, and when we disagree with a passion. There are milchamot Hashem. There are wars of the Lord. Jews disagree. But when we sit down and we study together, when we read a sefer together, says the Gemara, Einam zazim misham ad shenasim ohavim ze et ze. Even the worst enemies become friends. Because the word et vahev basufa actually mean vet aha yesh ahava basof. There is love at the end of such a disagreement. If we are willing to talk together, to listen to one another, and to do so in the context of Torah, then out of that dialogue comes friendship, comes the shared pursuit of truth, comes the renewal of our ancient faith. And that is what I hope will emerge today. And I hope it won't end there. Because throughout the day, we will be reminding you that we want there to be a tomorrow and a day after. And we want you, if you have been touched and a little stimulated by today, to say, it's not going to end here, but I am going to commit myself to just a little more learning in the year to come. We are launching today a program called The Jewish Hour, which is going to ask all of you and many thousands of others throughout the country to just commit yourself to learning a little, an hour a week, 30 hours in the course of the year. How am I doing? Oh. What about that? Oh yeah, I can't keep up with this technology. There you are. There you are. The Jewish Hour, just say no. Ladies and gentlemen, I want you to think about one engagement of an hour a week and let you be part, as we all try to be part, of that Kol Gadol V'lo Yasaf, that great sound which hopefully will begin today and continue throughout the year. Ladies and gentlemen, let me share with you just one thought. On the subject of today's conference, Judaism encounters modernity. What has been the nature of our encounter with modernity? I want to think for a moment of another famous encounter. Perhaps the most famous in the whole Torah, and certainly the most important because it was from that encounter that we get our name. We are Yisrael, Ki sarita im Elokim v'im anashim v'tuchal, because we have wrestled with God and with men and we have prevailed. We read about this encounter yesterday in Shul. You remember, Jacob is about to encounter his brother Esau, who many years before had threatened to kill him. And Jacob is afraid. Not just afraid, but v'yira Yaakov ma'od vayetzelo, extremely afraid and acutely distressed. And he assembles every conceivable strategy. He prays. He sends gifts. He assembles his camps to get ready for war. And he's still not at ease. And that night, Vayivate Yaakov levado, Jacob is left alone. Vayeyavek ishimo ad alot hashacha, and a man wrestled with him until dawn. And it is out of that encounter that we get our name. I want to ask a very simple question. With whom was Jacob wrestling? The Torah itself says with an ish, just with a person. Our sages say, Imsaro shel Esav, with the guardian angel of Esau. The prophet Hosea says, just malach, an angel. Jacob himself thinks it was God. He says, Ki ra'iti Elokim panim el panim v'tinasel nafshi, I saw God face to face and I was saved. But I want to suggest another answer. One that encompasses all the others, but perhaps the most profound of all, the answer of the Rambam, because I think this goes to the very heart of where we are today. Maimonides said, with whom was Jacob wrestling? The answer is, Jacob was wrestling with himself. Who was Jacob? Who was Jacob? Jacob was born and given the name Yaakov because v'yado chesed ba'akev achiv, because ba'akev Esav, he was holding on to the heel of his brother Esau. Jacob was the person who bought Esau's birthright. He was the person who took Esau's blessing. Jacob was the person who dressed up in Esau's clothing. Jacob was the person who, when his father asked him, "Who are you, my son?" said, "Ani Esav b'chorecha." I am Esau, your firstborn. Jacob was the one who took Esau's name. Who was Jacob? Jacob was the person who wanted to be Esau. And that is why before Jacob could face Esau, before he could be shalem, at peace with himself, he had to wrestle with himself. He had to come to the realization that he wasn't Esau, that he was no longer even Yaakov, the person who wanted to be Esau. He was Israel. He was a Jew. If we were to define the Jewish encounter with modernity over the past 100, even 200 years, we would have to come to a very acute realization that for the first time in 2,000 years, Jews were, and who knows, to a little degree perhaps even still are, embarrassed about being Jews. What does Jackie Mason say at the end of all these shows? They laugh at my jokes and then they say, "Too Jewish." The late Shlomo Carlebach, you know, the folk singer, used to go around America to all sorts of campuses. I used to mix with all sorts of chevra in all sorts of strange and wonderful ways. And then he used to ask people, what is their religious belief? And he used to say this: if I see a student who stands up and says, "I'm a Catholic," I know that's a Catholic. Student gets up and says, "I'm a Protestant," I know that's a Protestant. Student gets up and says, "I'm just a human being," I know that's a Jew. Can you imagine this? We are the people who take the remark, "Funny, you don't look Jewish," as a compliment. Just think about modernity. Do you know modernity was practically invented by Jews? Freud invented psychoanalysis. Relativity was invented by Einstein. Sociology by Emil Durkheim. Modern philosophy by Wittgenstein. Modern linguistics by Noam Chomsky. Structural anthropology by Levi Strauss. Modern music by Gustav Mahler, Maurice Ravel, Arnold Schoenberg. We had Marx, Karl, and Groucho. We had Berlin, Isaiah, and Irving. You name it, we invented it. Modernity consists of 100 contributions by Jews. But how many of those were Jewish contributions? They were great contributions. I don't minimize any of them. For heaven's sake, they enlarged the whole horizons of human knowledge. But today, we have reached the level at which we have already proved what we wanted to prove. We have proved that we can wear Esau's clothes. We can carry Esau's name. We can take his blessings. We can be just as good an Esau as Esau. But now comes the question, can we be Jacob? Can we be Israel? Can we be Jews? Woody Allen, once made a film called Zelig. Did any of you see this? Incredible film, his most Jewish film. Shows how an individual, some character, Woody Allen, can be anyone. Amongst presidents, he's a president. Among scientists, he's a scientist. The only question is, can he be himself? And that is our question, our wrestling match, our encounter with modernity. Think of what the Jewish world would have been like if we had had just one Einstein, or just one Wittgenstein, or just one Gustav Mahler, who devoted themselves to renewing Jewish spirituality. Why didn't they do it? Where was our pride? Where was our sense of self? Where was our identity? Can we forget, ladies and gentlemen, that the faith we carry is not a small thing? We were the people, our ancestors were the people who taught Western civilization what it is to believe in God. The Torah taught humanity the sanctity of human life, the imperative of justice, the primacy of right over might, the concept of peace as a religious ideal. And even when Jews were scattered and dispersed and crushed with poverty, they still devoted themselves to study and prayer, to the life of the mind and the life of the soul. I tell you, our faith is no small thing. The Judaism in which I believe is not the Judaism you and I read about every week in the papers. It really isn't. All that bickering, all that fractiousness, all those petty divisions, that isn't Judaism. Judaism is vast. Torah is the most remarkable attempt since man first walked on earth to bring the divine presence, the Shekhinah, into daily life, and to invest small deeds and simple human relationships with Kedusha, with the infinite splendor of the presence of God. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope that is what you and I will encounter today, the real Judaism. I am not very technologically literate. You know why we have kids, don't you? So that somebody in the family understands what is the internet. I'm still late Stone Age, speaking personally. But there is one invention in the 20th century whose spiritual significance, to my mind, has not been properly recognized. What invention am I talking about? Those of you who have tape recorders will know this invention. It is called a Dolby noise reduction system. You heard of that? What is a Dolby noise reduction system? I'll tell you, you have a tape recorder, a cheap tape recorder, and you have an old tape. You put on the tape, you want to hear the music. What do you hear? You hear hiss, you hear crackle, you hear noise. You can't hear the music. You buy a slightly more expensive tape recorder, and you press the button marked Dolby Noise Reduction System. Magic happens. The hiss gets lower, the noise, the crackle diminishes, and you can hear the music. Ladies and gentlemen, Anglo Jewry needs a Dolby Noise Reduction System. Let's hear a little less noise, a little less crackle and hiss of Jews attacking other Jews, of Jews criticizing other Jews. That's just noise. Let us hear a little less of that. And let us today hope that we hear instead the music of Torah, the music of the Kol Gadol V'lo Yasaf, the great sound that never once ceased, and which will be played again today. Thank you.
Over 1/3 of the delegates to the first Encounter Conference were under 30, which demonstrates that there is a thirst for Jewish knowledge among young people. Over 80% of the participants were not religiously observant, which shows that right across Anglo Jewry there are people seeking educational and spiritual growth. The Ashkenazi Chief Rabbi of Israel, Rabbi Yisrael Meir Lau, delivered a moving keynote address on the topic Torah Education, the Eternity of Am Yisrael.
כבוד הרב הראשי, הלורד הרב יעקובוביץ' שליטה, with many thanks for his warm and kind introduction and very warm words. I wish I deserve at least a part of the expectations that he have expressed just now. כבוד הרב הראשי, הדוקטור יונתן סקס, כבוד אב בית הדין, הרב חנוך הכהן ארנטרוי, Mr. Chairman, כבוד רבי ישראל רול, כבוד הרבנים הגדולים, האורחים, who came to participate as lecturers, as an audience from far and from near, שלום שלום לרחוק ולקרוב. מוריי ורבותיי, ladies and gentlemen. Every one of you remembers the very famous symposium on the Canadian radio, which was between the British historian Professor Toynbee and the late Dr. Yaakov Herzog, son of Chief Rabbi Herzog Zetzal, which was mentioned just now, and he served that time as the Israeli ambassador to Canada. On the Canadian radio, there was a debate between those two. Toynbee, to make it very short, used to say that we, the Jewish people, are not entitled to be a nation like the nations. We don't deserve a land, a country, a state of our own, not a parliament, nor a government, neither an army nor a police. We have to be spread out all over the world to put our influence about monotheism, about the Ten Commandments, about Torah, about spirit, and not to be a nation because we are not entitled to be a nation. You are not a nation. You are a sect, a religious sect, and that's all. Against all the prophecies who speak about the redemption of the Jewish people, against the past of the Jewish history, and against the future of Jewish vision. Dr. Herzog answered. This was a debate of 3 to 4 hours. And you can read it partly in the book Hen Am Levadad Yishkon, the words taken from Bil'am ben Beor in the Torah. Just in an illustrated way, I will put one sentence of this debate in front of you. Are we a nation or not? And if we are, by what? What makes us a nation if we are a nation? Can you imagine an aircraft, Olympic aircraft, landing in Athens airport? An old man comes down on the stairs. One of the workers will climb up the stairs to help him with his luggage. What's your name? He doesn't understand even the question. Finally, we will discover the old man who came for a sightseeing of 24 hours in his own homeland and home city is Socrates. But the worker there doesn't understand the classic Latin language. And of course, Socrates doesn't know the language of today. Okay, they will find a translator. The translator will come and he will answer the questions of Socrates. Where is the temple of Zeus? A temple of Zeus? There is no more Zeus here in Greece. There is a very special church, the Orthodox Greece church, ruling over the religion life of the Greece people. The Senate, there is no more Senate. The king, we don't have a king anymore. The power of Greece, ruling all over the world till India. Roxana, the wife of Mokdon. We don't rule any other country. We are a part of NATO, an ally of the Western countries governed by the United States of America. And we are not the most important part of NATO. What is with our art? We are not very special, neither in art nor in sports, even a little bit in basketball. Greece of Papandreou or Karamanlis has almost nothing with Greece of Socrates, Plato, or Aristo, just geography and some memories. The mentality, the culture, the faith, the power, everything quite different. And the Greece people are entitled to carry the name of Greece and the nationality of Greece. They are Yevanim, not only for Hanukkah this coming week, but Yevanim indeed, politically. Can you imagine an Alitalia aircraft comes to Fiumicino, near Rome. An old man comes down. One of the workers will climb up the stairs to help him. What's your name? Doesn't understand the question. He will say only 3 words on the top of the stairs. Vini, vidi, vici. And nobody in Fiumicino will understand what is he saying here. It's a crazy man. Who are you? Julius Caesar. They will find a translator from Latin to Italian language of today, modern language. Where is Jupiter's temple? Jupiter? A temple of Jupiter today? We have the Vatican in the heart of Rome. John Paul II, born in Wadowice in Poland. He never heard such a name, Wadowice, near Krakow. He is our spiritual leader. The Senate of Rome. There is no Senate in Rome. The 2 consuls, the Emperor of Rome, the colonies of Rome, like Gallia, colonies, not even Ethiopia, Angola, we have nothing. Libya, we gave up everything. Our power, we are a part of NATO allies governed by the United States of America and not the most important part of NATO. That's Italy of today. Constitution of Justinianus. The word doesn't take the constitution from Italy. Even the United States, a newborn country 220 years ago, they have their constitution of 1791. Art, sports, Rome, Empire of Rome. Nothing in common. Rome of Fellini is not Rome of Caesar. But an El Al airplane will land in Tel Aviv airport, Lud. An old man will come at the door of the airplane. Someone who never visited this country, who wasn't born here, who didn't serve here in any function, not a general, not a minister, not a teacher, nothing, never touched this ground. And one of the workers will come up to help him with the luggage. And the old man will say, Shalom Aleichem. The worker will answer immediately, Aleichem Shalom. Same language. Who are you? Moshe. And who are you? Moshiko, also Moshe. From Georgia, Tbilisi. I work here. And you speak the holy language? Rak Ivrit. I almost forgot my Russian language, the Gruzinian. I'm here many years, 20 years. He was born in Egypt and passed away in Transjordan. He was born in Tbilisi, and they speak the same language. Even 3,300 years passed between. Do me a favor, Moshe Rabbeinu says. I am here for some hours only on a visit, and I forgot to bring with me my talit and tefillin. Oh, no problem, I will give you mine. You have a talit? With the 4 hutin? Sure. There are 2 synagogues here in the airport, in the terminal. Ground floor, second floor. I will bring you there. And he comes in for the prayer of Shacharit. Torat emet natan le'amo el, al yad nevi'o ne'eman beito. In the name of Moshe uvnei Yisrael lecha anu shira besimcha rabah. And they are quoting what he said in the Shira, Mi chamocha ba'elim Hashem, in the same language, in the terminal. Word by word, not missing one letter. And the same mezuzah, and the same tefillin, in the same place, in the same talit. Nothing is changed. And he wasn't born here, and he didn't born here. And they never met. And nothing is changed. Pesach, whatever. Moshe is a living person in Jewish tradition. He's not something anachronistic of thousands of years ago. Aren't we entitled to be a nation? What is a nation? If we keep our spirit, if we keep our commandments, if we live according to our behavior, the Jewish one, if we keep the Torah shebichtav and Torah shebe'al peh, the written one, the by heart one, given from one generation to the other, what is a nation? And in the same homeland. At least the third part of the Jewish people of today, settling back in the old new homeland. Veshavu banim ligvulam. Jeremiah, the prophet's prophecy of chapter 31, became a reality in our very eyes. Aren't we a nation? The Greeks are, who speaks about America. Zaire is a nation. Angola is a nation. Rwanda is a nation. Am Yisrael is not. What makes us a nation? Here is the answer. If Moshe and Moisesko and Moshiko and Musa and Moise and Moses, all of them, from Vladivostok to San Francisco, from Helsinki to Melbourne, in this coming week, Thursday evening, they will lit the first candle of Hanukkah. Because of 2,000 years ago, a miracle happened with oil. Instead of one night, it served for 8 nights. The same day, all over the world. In families that, unfortunately, the Christmas, lehavdil, elef alfei avdalot, came in and jumped through the window or the front door to the living room. Still, the menorah of Hanukkah is lit. And always in Kaf Hei Bekislev. They don't know in Santa Barbara or San Diego what is Kislev. They don't live according to Kislev. But Hanukkah they will celebrate together with London Jewry and Bnei Brak Jewry as well in the same date. This is the power of a nation. In the same evening, Leil Chamisha Asar Ben Nisan, Passover night, Leil HaSeder, in Kibbutz Beit Alpha, in Givat Brenner, in Yemen, in Baghdad, in Minsk and in Pinsk, whatever, south and north and west and east, all the tribes, Sfaradim, Ashkenazim, they eat the same menu for 3,308 years. Can you imagine the power of a nation? The same menu, matzot, no bread, no challah, matzot, same menu, over 3,300 years. The power of Torah makes us a united nation. The power of its commandments, observing its commandments. Brit Milah. You remember the story with the chief polkovnik, like a lieutenant colonel, who knocks at the door of a Jewish mohel in Moscow. in those times of Berlier, Molotov and Kaganovich and Malenkov, just after the dying of Stalin. And he was told at Moel that if we will catch you circumcising a Jewish child against the law, you will be sent for Siberia for the rest of your life. And he had the knife of Milah, all his instruments, in his bag, together with the talit and filin, some crackers, biscuits, near his bed in a bag. Every night when he went to sleep, he was ready to be called and sentenced for jail, for prison for the rest of his life. Once upon a night, 2:00 a.m., a strong knocking at his door. A polkovnik was standing there. Amazing. Usually they come soldiers, policemen, but not an officer in this high level. He didn't say a word, but give me another 5 minutes just to change, to take my coat. I'm ready to go with you. He took him, and he was the driver himself, which was a surprise for the Moel. 4 hours. 4 hours they went by car to the north. They came to a very small village in the northern part of Russia. Now he said, I will tell you why I took you away from your home. Don't worry. Noontime you will be back home. I want you to circumcise my boy because I am Jewish. I brought my wife some months ago to this village, not to make it in Moscow. Everyone knows me. I'm afraid to do it in Moscow. Here in the village, nobody knows us. I know that a brit can be done only daytime and not nighttime. I took you 2:00, now it's 6:00. In 1 hour you can make the bris. The Moel, trembling, made the bris. I know that Moel. Then he asked him, why are you doing it? Why are you doing it? Endangering not only your position, your life. Berlier's time. He said, look, I have nothing with Judaism, but this is the one sign that my father left me to remember who I am, Jewish. I don't want to break the chain. I will not break the chain. I want to leave my child what my father left to me. Let him know that he is a Jew. What he will do with it will be his problem. But I want to fulfill my function, my duty. I am a part of this chain which must be unbroken. What keeps us as a nation? This kind of education of Torah till Mesirut Nefesh, readiness to self-sacrifice ourselves in order to keep it. There is no alternative for this kind of heritage. Who is ready to self-sacrifice himself for Chilul Shabbat, for going by car on Shabbat? Nobody. Maybe it's convenient. Maybe it's comfort. Maybe I don't have another kind of education to be prevented of it, to avoid it. But to go on Kiddush Hashem, sanctification of God, to do something which is against Torah, you will not find any other substitute to the readiness of Kiddush Hashem for Jewish life. But to go and to live on the way of Kiddush Hashem for Torah, you have to know it. What is Torah? In the Shabbaton of Bnei Akiva near Norwich, Gloucester on the Sea, some months ago, I said, to bridge the gap between the secular and the religious, the observant sects in Israel or wherever in the Jewish world, all over the globe, it's a very difficult task because you cannot expect someone who doesn't know you to love you, to appreciate you, to admire you, to follow your footsteps. How many of our children, even in Israel, who are not in the Torah education frame, how many of them know what is inside of the mezuzah? In every school in Israel, there is a mezuzah at the door. I don't speak about, they don't know about conversions, about difficult problems of kashrut or ethics, medical ethics, agunot, very difficult issues. So that we don't sleep nights overnights looking for a kind of a solution of one of these problems. Test tube babies. No. I speak about the very simple things that everyone sees and is touching them. Maybe even kissing the mezuzah every day, in his home, in the bank, in the office, in the city hall, everywhere. And he's not even curious enough to ask himself, just a moment, in this plastic bag, what is inside of it? Why is everybody putting it with a bracha or kissing it? What is it? They don't know. And what do they know about Shabbat? Only the negative way. The Shamor et Yom HaShabbat Lekadsho, which is television, no. Football, no. Theater, no. Concert, no. Everything. The beach, no. Transportation, no. Smoking a cigarette, no. What is Shabbat? What is the positive thing? Zachor et Yom HaShabbat Lekadsho. Did they have the experience last 2 generations of a table of Shabbat? Shalom Aleichem. Shalom Aleichem. Eishes Chayil. The Kiddush. The Zmirot. The Dvar Torah. Birkat HaMazon. The 3 Seudot, the 4 prayers, Parashat HaShavua, the Haftorah of the week, the whole atmosphere of Shabbat. What do they know of it? Unfortunately, almost nothing. And we expect them what? We expect them to appreciate our feelings or to feel our pain in Bar Ilan Street in Jerusalem. Please. Don't go by car. Exactly in this road, 90% here are Shomrei Shabbat. Don't hurt us. Please. They don't understand because they never felt the holiness, the purity, the beauty of the Shabbat, the holidays, the high holidays even. First thing is education of Torah. This is the fundamental thing. To know, to learn. In our service of Shacharit every day, there is an application to the Almighty which has no brother, no friend in any other field of applications, asking something. When we pray before Kriyat Shema of Shacharit, all of a sudden, a Jew comes, makes a break in his prayer after Baruch Hu and says, Avinu. With such an applicant, Avinu, you understand that something must come now emotionally. Avinu, our Father. If this is not enough, Av HaRachaman, Father full of mercy. What is he doing now? Why is he asking in this formula? Not enough. Hamerachem. And after those 3 prefaces comes the 4th one. Rachem aleinu. Please, have mercy on us. What do you ask? Life? Health? Family? What are you asking from me that you apply to me with all these 4 titles? Avinu, Avarachaman, Hamerachem, Rachem Aleinu. We ask you one thing. Ten belibenu bina. Give wisdom in our hearts, emotionally. Lehavin, to understand. Lehaskil, to learn, to be educated. Lishmoa, to want to listen. Not listening by ear just, by listening by heart. Ten belibenu. Shmiat halev is one of the ways to accomplish Torah, says in Masechet Avot, the 6th chapter. Lilmod ulelamed, then lishmor velasot ulekayem, to keep all these studies. But first of all, give us the wisdom. Put it in our hearts. Wanting to learn, then to teach, then to observe. Be'ahava. Do it with love. Talmud Toratecha be'ahava. There is no other tefillah, another prayer. Wherever, whatever, parnasah, nachat from children, all important things, health. With such an application, Avinu, Avarachaman, Amerachem, Rachem Aleinu. The smartest of all, King Solomon, in his dream when he became the king of Israel, he was asked to say one thing that you want from the Almighty. He emphasized only one point in his request. Venatata le'avdecha, please give your servant, your slave, give him what? Lev shomea. Same expression. V'ten belibenu bina lishmoa. Belibenu lishmoa. Listening, hearing is with an ear. No. Lev shomea, and heart which is listening. Ki mi yuchal lishpot et amcha hakaved hazeh. Who can judge your difficult, and excuse me, stiff-necked people? You want me to be the king of Israel, the judge of them. For it, I need a special gift, and only you, Almighty, can give it to me. Lev Shomea. This is the request of every unique Jew, every individual, every morning. V'ten belibeinu bina lehavin ulehaskil lishmoa. This day is dedicated for the importance of Talmud Torah. I am very appreciating this phenomena itself. People who came to listen, not to fight, not to argue even, to know, to understand, and a little bit to feel even the importance of Talmud Torah, because the way is for Jewish education, first of all, to learn. How do we say in the Amida prayer 3 times a day? First of all, Ashiveinu avinu letoratecha. Bring us back to your Torah. Then, Vekorveinu malkeinu lavodatecha. Bring us nearer to worship, to work you, to serve you. This is the way of Vehachazirenu b'tshuva shleima lefanecha. First of all, Torah. Then avodah, observing the mitzvot. This is the way. This is the road. This is the highway. Not skipping anything. No jumping. Entering in the high gate is the way of, first of all, to learn. One of the students of Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, the creator of the Musa movement in the Torah world, came to him, and a graduator of Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, asking him a question, taking an advice. I have only half an hour a day saved for learning Torah. What do you suggest me to learn? Torah, Nevi'im, Ktuvim, what book? Mishnah, what Masechet? Talmud, what Masechet? Rishonim, Achronim, Rambam, Shulchan Aruch. Half an hour. Rabbi Soel said, Musar, moral books, ethics, Mesilas Yesharim, Chovot Alvavot, Sharei Tshuva, Orchos Tzadikim. Today we can add Michtav Meliyahu, and of this kind. Half an hour. He said, maybe Mishnah Brura, Dinim, to know how to behave myself. He didn't speak about the Mishnah Brura. He spoke about Chaye Odom, Shulchan Aruch. He said, Musar. Maybe a Blat Gemore, Musar. Maybe Parashat HaShavua, the fundament, Musa. Okay? The Rebbe said, Musa will be Musa. Standing at the door and near the mezuzah, he asked, may I ask why? Why do you insist on Musa? He said, if you will learn half an hour every day Musa, you will find that you have much more than half an hour time to learn Torah a day. The Chofetz Chaim once told a story. I have no time, but I must tell you. There were two friends in the same cheder in the small shtetl in the village somewhere in Russia or Vilta. And they were separated in age of 13, 14. One became very rich, a wealthy man, somewhere in Petersburg. The other one, whatever he tried to do, commercially, whatever, he failed. The only thing he succeeded to build a huge family. 10 children, but he didn't have bread for them. So the only way left for him was, unfortunately, to be a beggar, a schnorrer. He went with an open hand to the shuls on the streets to bring some coins for the grocery to buy. Once upon a day in a main road in the city, a coach stopped, today we would say a Rolls Royce or a Jaguar, and a very wealthy man, according to his appearance, came down out of the car, of the carriage, and he thought this is the chance of the day. He went to him asking for a nedava, for charity. All the servants around, they pushed him away. The schmattes, like a clochard, a dirty one. But the wealthy man, for a second, saw his face. The beggar is going away, but he is listening. His name is screaming out, Yankel! Yankel? One who is Yankel, he looks, but he saw that the rich man is crying. So he understood it is a mistake. He means another one. He goes further. Yankel! Until one of the servants ran after him, caught him. Your name is Yankel? The boss wants to speak to you. Are you Yankel Yakubovich? He said, yeah. Are you from Yankel? I didn't speak about the Lord. Yankel comes together. Are you from the same shtetl? From this and this? Say. Your Rebbe in Chayder was, sure. Don't you remember a friend on the same bench, Isaac? Said, that's me. Wow. 8 years we spent together. We played together, we learned together, we davened together, we ate together. After the first memories, the rich one said to the poor man, I see that life is not smiling to you very much. How can I help you? I want you to stop begging money in the streets. Oh, just for the honor of my kids. In the school they are asked about the profession of their father, and they are ashamed to tell that their father is a beggar. Do me a favor. 500 pounds. In the market, there is a bush. I can sell there matches, candles. Tools passed, shoe passed. And I will give it to you back, £1 a month, £1 a month. Chofetz Chaim spoke about the ruble. Every month I will pay back 1 ruble of the 500. But this will take me out of the streets. I will be a soicher, a merchant. £500, and this will save your situation. Sure. Solve the problem? Yeah. Okay. Take my card. This is my address, home address. 5 o'clock. If you come, I give you the 500, not as a loan, but as a present for the old times, a gift. You can imagine that 4 o'clock already, the poor man will be already at the door, waiting for 5 o'clock. 5, 5:15, 5:30, he doesn't come. The rich man understood something happened to him, or he lost the address. A day later, on the same spot in the city, he comes out of the carriage. The same poor man is running to him now with a story. Please, you remember we were in the same class at the Cheder. I need £500 a loan. I will pay it once a month to buy bush in the market, candles, matches, pupas, tukpas. He looked at him as a crazy one. He said, what? We have met yesterday. I offered you, and you told me the same story. I was waiting for you half an hour. Why didn't you come? Okay, forgive me, I had a terrorist, I had what, this, I had that. May I come today? Sure. But please, don't be late. 5, 5:15, 5:30, the man doesn't come. A day later, the same request. In the afternoon, the same phenomena. He doesn't come. Everyone was laughing when the Chofetz Chaim told the story. Chofetz Chaim said, please don't laugh. We are the schnorrer of this story. We are that beggar. In the morning, we came up, most of us, we daven Shachris today. Oh, sure. Especially on Sunday, we have a lot of time. We daven Shachris. The first request in Tfilat Amidah, after praising the Almighty that He is Mogen Avrom and Mechayeh Meisim and Akel HaKodosh, then we came with application. Ato choinen le'odom das. You are the bank of wisdom. You have the treasure of Chochmah, Bina Vadat, or Deya Bina Ve'askel, Nusach Ashkenaz. Please, choneinu me'itcha. Give us free, bechanina, chinam. Give us me'itcha from yours. Chochmah, Bina Vadat, Deya Bina Ve'askel. Baruch Ato Hashem choinen adoas. The Almighty says, that's what you ask me? Please, come, I give you free. How much you want. The shelves of books of Torah education are heavy and full with wisdom of generations, of dozens of thousands of books only based on the Rambam. Everything is for you, in your service. Take it. I open you 50 gates of Chochmah. Be Talmidei Chachamim. And we went somewhere. I don't speak about today. You came to this conference very fine. We went, I don't know where to. We came on Mincha in the afternoon with the same request. Choneinu me'itcha chochma bina vadat. The Almighty says, I was waiting for you the whole day. Why didn't you come? Did I reject your offer? Did I say no? Comes Ma'ariv, the same thing. Choneinu me'itcha chochma bina vadat. Okay, Ma'ariv is 5 o'clock. You have now till tomorrow morning 14 hours till the service. 14 hours. The lessons are, the Rabbanim in the shuls of the United Synagogue wait for you. Every shul, every rov, this shir, that shir, morning shir, the afternoon shir, daf yomi, halacha, Torah, whatever. Please come, knock at the doors. Don't knock. They are open for you. A day later, he comes with the same problem. Give us the 500 pounds. I was ready to give you yesterday. Why didn't you come? Shall we wait for another conference to remind you the story next year? This conference, I want to conclude my words, is a modern way. Chief Rabbi spoke about Judaism facing modernity. Even this day itself is a part of modernity in service of Judaism. Exactly Sunday 4 weeks ago in Le Bourget in Paris, I came for 3 hours to France to speak for a public of Yom HaTorah, Day of Learning Torah in Paris. And they were there in the hangar of the exhibition area in Paris, Le Bourget, 20,000 people who came to listen to the lecture. All of the day with the exhibitions and the workshops, there were over 50,000 people. At once, in the afternoon session, like this one in public, there were 20,000 people. This is the way how to bring in the hearts and the knowledge to understand the importance of Torah education, Torah knowledge as a fundament for Jewish continuity and Jewish existence and Jewish identification. My father-in-law, late Chief Rabbi of Tel Aviv Jaffa, Hagoen Arav Yitzchak Yedidia Frenkel, Zechet Tzadik Livracha, used to tell me when I was in the beginning of my rabbinic way, Israel, pay attention to 3 lines of the Gemara in Menachot. All the instruments which were in the tabernacle in the desert after Yetziat Mitzrayim, they were appropriate for those times and for later on Beit Rishon and even Beit Sheni. Nothing was changed. The ark, the Mizbeach HaNechoshet, Mizbach HaDomo, Mizbach HaZohov, the robe of Kohen Gadol, all the 8 begadim, dressings of the Kohen Gadol, 4 of the Kohanim, the usual Kohanim, nothing is changed. The same menorah, the same shulchan, the same kiyah, staff, everything except one instrument which was suitable for the desert, not suitable later on, even not for the first temple. The golden trumpets, silver trumpets, Bamidbar Yud, Shtei Chatzotzrot Kesef. Because the trumpets are the communication. Communication of desert time cannot be suitable as a communication, as media in the modern time. Today you have to use the trumpet of a radio, of a research day, a conference, even television or video cassettes, books in the language which is necessary to apply to every one of us, not to forget anyone, not to give up one Jewish soul, to apply to everyone from one edge to another. To be a Rav Moreh Hora'ah B'Yisrael in the way of Hillel HaZaken. Hevei mitalmidav shel Aaron, says Hillel, Ohev Shalom veRodef Shalom, Ohev et Abriot, to love everyone, umekarvan la Torah. Please pay attention. Not mekarev haTorah la briot. I usually say, mekarvan la Torah. Don't sell the Torah with a compromise or a discount of 25% or 50% of discounts. The Torah is not on sale. he didn't say Hillel. Halocha kedivre beis Hillel. Hillel didn't say mekarevet haTorah labriot, to bring the Torah closer to everyone. The Torah is eternity. The Torah is what it is given in Mount of Sinai 3,308 years ago. Do whatever with love and passion, in friendship, with a smile. Umekarvan, to bring them La Torah in Heya Yediyah, the known Torah, which is no substitute, no alternative, and no changes, because this is given from the eternity itself. That's why it is eternal. As Maimonides put in one of the 13 principles of Jewish faith, Ani ma'amin be'emunah shleima, I do believe, fully faith. Zot HaTorah, that this Torah, lo tehei muchlefet, will not be changed, will not be with an alternative, no substitute, kol ikar. So, ohev et habriot, be, ohev shalom, rodef shalom, love everyone, and be mekarev la Torah. This is, I think, the main goal of this day. And hopefully, according to the silence here, to acceptance by you of our words, I hope we reached that goal of at least today, Hashivenu Avinu leToratecha. Tomorrow, Korvenu Malkeinu la'avodatecha. All together, V'hachzirenu b'tshuva shleima lefanecha. This is just after the request of Choneinu me'itcha, Chochma, Bina, V'da'at.
In December 1997, at London's second Encounter Conference, issues of communal diversity and community unity were at the top of the agenda. Rabbi Dr. Abraham Twersky, a renowned psychiatrist and founder of the Gateway Rehabilitation Clinic in Pittsburgh, USA, was the keynote speaker. He used his experience in psychology and his background as a rabbinic leader and author to address perhaps the most difficult issue facing the Jewish community: one nation, or a divided people.
Chief Rabbi Diane Ehrentreu, Rabbi Dov, Rabbi Sneimer, honored guests, as you've heard, much well-due gratitude has been expressed to all those who have labored so tirelessly to organize this conference. But from what it seems, that there's another power organizing this conference. As we know, some people were prevented from appearing here. And of course, I see divine providence in everything. I was in Manchester Thursday night, and at 9:30 Friday morning, I was on my route back to London. At 11:15, the train stalled outside of Stokes, or somewhere around there. And we were told that the engine had failed, and they were sending a replacement engine. We would arrive in London by 2 o'clock, which was still enough time to make it for Shabbat. And then about 40 minutes later, another announcement was that the replacement engine had failed. And so I had no choice except to get off and take a taxi to Manchester to be in time for Shabbat. For one engine to fail, perhaps that could be a natural phenomenon. For two engines to fail has to be divine providence. So something is happening that it is the divine hand involved in here. I suppose that I envy Chief Rabbi Lau for being spared the formidable challenge of having to address this topic. And I might say that in my own defense, that I am not here as a formal official rabbi. Certainly I don't represent the state of Israel in any way, any particular party, any particular group. I'm not even a practicing rabbi. As you heard, I gave up the pulpit in 1959. So I am here perhaps as a lay person, and all the opinions I express are simply my own. No one else is to be held responsible for them. And it is necessary to say this because I understand that I have already come under criticism for what I'm going to say this afternoon. You see, this topic is so emotionally laden that one cannot possibly say anything without offending anyone. And if I were to say nothing more than Mary had a little lamb, right, we would find some very sharp criticism for having made that statement. The topic is one of overwhelming importance, and I can only share with you some of my feelings simply as another descendant of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, to the very painful situation that exists in Judaism today, that has always existed since the time of Moses, but is perhaps more crucial today because our very survival is at stake. Of course we are one nation, and yes, we can be divided, but the divisions should not be anything which reaches to our very essence and to our very roots. There is one principle that follows through all of Judaism, and it was mentioned before. I am a descendant of the Baal Shem Tov, whose entire principle of Hasidus was Ahavat Yisrael, the love of a fellow Jew, for which there could be no compromise. And the Kabbalistic statements made by the great teachers, the Arizal, Ramoshe Cordovera, the founders of modern Kabbalah, is that one must love a fellow Jew without discrimination, regardless of whatever belief or whatever practices she or he has. And I firmly believe that if we were truly, and I will come under criticism for this, that if we were truly to be observant of all the mitzvot as they are to be observed, I think that some of the problem would have been relieved. I say this because just recently I came across a statement of one of our great ethicists which disturbed me to no end. He quoted the Talmud of Rabbi Akiva, where Rabbi Akiva said, "Ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha," to love your neighbor as yourself, to love another person. Zeh klal gadol b'Torah. This is the general principle, the all-encompassing principle of Torah. And so this great ethicist, I believe it was Rabbi Yerucham, said that a klal, a general all-encompassing statement, embraces all the details within it. Otherwise it would not be an all-encompassing statement. And as a result of that observation, he says that all 613 mitzvot must fall under the rubric, must fall under the general all-encompassing rule of loving another person as yourself. Therefore, he goes on to conclude, after you have done a mitzvah of whatever it is, if your Ahavat Yisrael, if your love of a fellow Jew has not been enhanced and increased by performance of that mitzvah, you have not completed the mitzvah in its full range with all of its intentions. Now that distressed me greatly. You see, ever since age 13, I have been putting on tefillin every day. Shall I truthfully say that after I have put on tefillin, my Ahavat Yisrael is greater than it was a half hour earlier? I have fine mezuzot, and I have tried to get the best quality mezuzot. And yes, I have ritually observed the mitzvah. And after affixing the mezuzah to the door, has my Ahavat Yisrael increased? After listening to the shofar, has my Ahavat Yisrael increased? Can I truthfully say that after I have taken the etrog and the lulav and shaken it, and have made the bracha, that I feel a greater love for other Jews than I did before? That I do so after I have eaten matzah? I do all these wonderful mitzvahs. Many of us do. Can we truthfully say that our Ahavat Yisrael is increased, or is there something lacking in performance of the mitzvot? You see, the Baal Shem Tov, when he performed his mitzvot, his Ahavat Yisrael increased. And so many of us, for whatever reasons, are lacking in Ahavat Yisrael. And so we find reasons to discriminate. Yes, we can be critical. For heaven's sake, the business that I'm in every day in treating drug addiction, I must sit and counsel parents whose children are perhaps drug addicted and must teach them tough love, and that they must take some firm steps in discipline or whatever. But then regardless of what they do, their love for their child must be unconditional. This is what Ahavas Yisrael must be. Unconditional love, even if we disagree. Now that is the essence of Yiddishkeit. That is the essence of Judaism, that there be unconditional love. Obviously, we must be critical. We must be critical of many things. Anything that we think is improper and we think that is destructive, we have to call attention to it. But we can do so civilly and decently. Now, in every population, regardless of what it is, you will always find a tiny element of people who take upon themselves a zealousness and a fanaticism and insist on taking the law into their own hands. I don't identify with them. I remember a person coming into me and telling me that, Jewish gentleman, that he doesn't believe in God. And then I listened to him for a little while, and I said, oh, I have no problem identifying with you. The God that you don't believe in, I don't believe in either. You see, in order to have a concept of God, we have to do a great deal of studying and hearing what our great Torah scholars have said about Almighty God. I've published several books, some of which are particularly dear to me. And those that are most dear to me are those where I recount stories of the lives of our great tzaddikim, of our great sages, who exhibited true spirituality and true Ahavat Yisrael. I was in Israel, and I passed by a street where there were some people protesting the violation of Shabbat. Do I understand where they are coming from? Yes. Do I know how dear Shabbat is to observant Jews? Yes. Do I understand why it hurts them to see violation of Shabbat? Yes. But I'm reminded a story of the great Baal Shem Tov, who once saw a person violating Shabbat. The Baal Shem Tov was an enormous intuitive psychologist. And he said that denial is a psychological fact. People are blind to their own defects. Oh, I can tell you this is absolutely true. Therefore, he says, since Almighty God wishes that people should improve upon themselves and to realize what their defects are, he allows them to see their own defects in others, because they are not blind to seeing defects in others. You know, we do that all the time very well. And so the Baal Shem Tov said, when you see a defect in others, recognize that it is your own and work upon correcting that defect within yourself. So it's one of the basic teachings of the Baal Shem Tov. The world is a mirror. It shows you what you are. And so when the Baal Shem Tov once came across someone violating Shabbat, he realized that he himself must have somehow violated Shabbat, otherwise he never would have seen it. And so he did some soul searching to discover where he had violated Shabbat, and he could not find it. And so he asked for it to be revealed to him where he had violated Shabbat, so that he could do a proper teshuvah and repentance. And it was revealed to him that at one time he heard someone speaking disparagingly of a Torah scholar, of a tzaddik. And inasmuch as the Zohar states that a tzaddik has the Kedusha, the sanctity of Shabbat. Therefore, when he did not defend the honor of this particular tzaddik who was being spoken disparagingly of, that was considered tantamount to a violation of Shabbat. Beautiful story. But the teaching there is, the Baal Shem saw someone violating Shabbat, and he screamed Shabbos, but not at other people, but at himself. When he saw a violation of Shabbat, he realized there was something wrong with himself, not with the other person, and that he must correct himself. My friends, one of the reasons that my business is flourishing, one of the reasons that there is so much drug addiction, is that because when someone observes someone who has taken a hit of heroin or cocaine, and he sees the euphoria, the enormous feeling, the high that the person has, he's attracted to it. How did you do it? And of course, the person will give him some cocaine or heroin. Try it for yourself. And unfortunately, that's how addiction spreads. All of us wish to feel high. Fortunately, we have the good judgment not to go for destructive chemicals, but everyone wants to feel a surge of happiness. Everyone wants to feel a feeling of euphoria. Our Talmud and our ethical works tell us that Shabbat is me'en olam haba. Observance of Shabbat gives you a feeling of being in Gan Eden. It gives you a true high, a true euphoria. That's the way Shabbat should be observed. The Talmud says, Vayechulu, the paragraph of the story of creation, of Genesis, with which we initiate the Shabbat and Kiddush, that the Vayechulu means that we are to approach Shabbat with a sense of completion. The past week is completed. It does not exist anymore. All the worries, all the troubles, all the financial worries, do I owe money, this or that, the other thing, they're gone. Incidentally, there's a tradition in our family from the Baal Shem Tov, and it is a play on a Yiddish word, that Friday night we serve one of the dishes is a side dish of farfel. Now, perhaps you've eaten farfel tzimis, very delectable, but it is a play on words, because in Yiddish there is a word farfaun, mean it's bygone. And every Friday night when my mother used to serve the farfel tzimis, she used to say, whatever happened until now is farfaun. And serving that dish was symbolic that the past week is gone, don't let it burden you. Now, can you imagine someone coming into Shabbat with the feeling that they've dispensed with all of the worries of the week? Nothing bothers them. They're not worried about whether they're going to be able to pay the mortgage or the rent or how much money or where they're going to get this or how they're going to get tuition, all the many, 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 many worries that we have that unfortunately we are not able to divest ourselves up when Shabbat comes in. But if we could do that, what would our Shabbat be like? It would be me'en olam haba. It would be a Gan Eden. It would be a euphoria that would put cocaine and heroin to shame. And if I observed Shabbat like that, how many people would be running after me? What are you doing? Share it with me. Tell me how I can partake of that wonderful feeling. I too wish to be euphoric. I too wish to have that me'en olam haba that you have. My friends, if somebody out there is not observing Shabbat, it's because he is not observing the euphoria in me. And the Baal Shem Tov said, if you see someone violating Shabbat, yes, you must scream Shabbat, Shabbos, but not at the other person, at yourself. How foolish it is to yell Shabbos at others, let alone to throw stones. There are ways to disagree with other people, but we can do so in a dignified manner. And I know I will come under criticism for criticizing those who throw filth, whether it's at the street or desecrate the kotel because of their disagreement with the practice. And incidentally, I don't defend those who approach the kotel the way they did. I was in the Vatican and I saw women coming into the Vatican and covering their hair and covering their short sleeves because of the respect that they had for the Catholic Church. Is it only the Catholic Church that we can respect? Why do we respect other faiths and not our own? So yes, I can disagree with them, but there's ways to disagree. You don't disagree by throwing nappies. You don't disagree by acting in an undignified manner that does not become us. And so yes, there's a small percentage for whom I cannot be responsible. I do not identify with them. I identify with the Baal Shem Tov, whose love for every Jew was inexhaustible. And he once said, I wish that I could love the worst, I wish that I could love the greatest tzaddik the way Hashem loves the greatest rasha. I wish I had the love for the most righteous, pious person in the world that Hashem has for the most wicked sinner. That is the concept of Ahavas Yisrael. So, people who are on the extremes of either side, zealousness gets us nowhere. Reasonable discussions can lead to an understanding and to an amalgamation. But I told you I will speak only for myself and not for any organization, not for any party, not for any government. I do have problems with some of the divisiveness that has occurred that was unnecessary. And perhaps I can show my bias, and I will accept the criticism, because I am told that there was a couple who was driving along. They had been married 38 years. And the husband was driving the car, and the wife said to him, "Dear, do you remember how in the days when we were in our courtship, how close we sat to each other?" And the husband said, "I haven't moved." My friends, I understand what the problems are in accepting some very rigid restrictions. But I must tell you that I have appeared at many gatherings. I have an opportunity to lecture on many topics in many places. And I know that after a lecture, it is quite common, in fact, the practice, that after the lecturer has delivered his talk and the speech is over, that he is invited to one of the homes, and a small group, perhaps of the participants who organize the conference or whatever, invite the lecturer to their homes for a small little informal get-together, little chat, discussing things more informally. They have coffee and refreshments, pastries. And I have been at lectures where I have said, if I were here lecturing to you, being of another faith, perhaps I was a Catholic clergyman, you could invite me to your home, you could serve me coffee and cake. If I was a black Muslim and you invited me to your home, I could come and share with you. But you will not invite me to your homes, will you? Because you can't serve me coffee and cake, because your homes are not kosher. And I asked them, I have been in Pittsburgh 37 years. I have gotten 3 honorary doctorates. I'm about to receive now the Distinguished Service Award from the Pennsylvania Medical Society. I have done nothing to disgrace myself or to disgrace my people. Why am I not welcome in your homes? Why are your doors open to everyone else who can come and partake of the goods you have to offer? Where's my fault? Where have I sinned that I am hated? Why have you locked me out of your homes? Because it is more convenient not to keep kosher. And that's why I am discriminated against, because some people wish to have some convenience. My home is open to everyone. I have had every person from every kind of faith, from every kind of denomination or sub-denomination in my home. Why are not all homes open to me as well? It is a painful observation, my friends. There's a divisiveness that does not belong there. Some people will say, and perhaps it is because of a lack of understanding. When I say the story of I have not moved, yes? My father used to tell a beautiful story. Told of the incident where there was a young girl who was very, very pious. Her father was a rabbi. And she contracted a very serious disease. And the doctor said that she must eat the liver of hogs in order to get the particular nutrition that will save her from her illness, save her from death. And she said, I can't, it's abhorrent, I can't eat chazer. And the father said, you must. The Torah requires you to save your life. And he brought in other rabbis who finally convinced her that in order to save her life, the Torah requires that she eat this hog liver. And so finally she capitulated, and she said, very well, if I have to do it, I will do it. But it's bad enough that I'm eating treif. I want it shechted, slaughtered properly, ritually. The father called into the shochet and he said, look, this is a sick girl. It's to save her life. She's being totally irrational. But, she won't do it any other way. Please do me a favor, shech the chazer ritually. Well, since it was a matter of life and death, shechted the chazer. And she said, the lungs have to be inspected to see if they're kosher. I mean, who heard of that? She said, the lungs have to be inspected to see if they're kosher. Otherwise, I won't eat it. So they took out the lung and they examined it. And unfortunately, they found a little lesion, right? Which, if it were in a cow or a lamb, it would be kosher. She said, take it to the rabbi to ask for a shiloh to get a decision on it. So they brought it to the rabbi, and the rabbi looked at it and he said, look, I understand this lesion, if it were on a lamb or calf, would be kosher, but how do you expect me to say the chazer is kosher? My friends, when you ask a rabbi a shiloh, he cannot use his discretion to say chazer is kosher. I would like to be able to dispense with everything for Jewish unity. I don't have the freedom to do so. I can't transfer Shabbos to Sunday. I can't say that we do not need circumcisions. This is what the early Christians did in order to make Christianity more appealing to the heathens. I cannot say that chazer is kosher. And so you see, if a problem comes up where I have to give a halachic decision, fortunately I am not a halachic authority, so I don't have to face that dilemma. But I have only the tools that I am given to work with. Don't expect me to say something that I cannot. And so what happens is we have some very serious problems of marriages that were not properly terminated by a get. Those cause problems. Problems of laws of conversion. If I were permitted to make my own dispensations, incidentally, I did engineer a dispensation from the Pope. It's a little story that I might tell you someday. What happened was that I had a patient who was a young priest who was a very serious alcoholic, could not possibly stay sober. And I told him that in order to save his life, he must abstain from all alcohol, and since he could not have any controls, the poor man was drinking mouthwash. In order to save his life, he must take a medication called antabuse, and this medication makes it impossible for him to drink, because a drop of alcohol after taking antabuse would make him deathly sick. And he said, well, can I say the Mass? I said, what's the problem? He says, I must take a sip of wine. I said, you can't take a sip of wine with antabuse. He says, then I cannot take the antabuse. I said, well, why can't you say the Mass with grape juice instead of wine? He said, there is no provision for that. And I had the opportunity to check with the local authorities, and they were right. There is no provision for saying the Mass on grape juice. So I went down to my office, and at that time, the former Bishop of Pittsburgh, who I had formed a very close relationship, had been elevated to the cardinalship, and he was number 3 man in the Vatican. And I called him to Rome, and I said, Cardinal, you've got to do me a favor. Right? I have to save this young man's life. Get me a dispensation that he's permitted to say the Mass with grape juice. And he said, Rabbi, he always called me Rabbi, not Doctor. He said, Rabbi, I shall personally carry this to the Holy Father. At that time, Pope Paul VI was the Pope. And the very next day he called me and he said, Rabbi, not only is your patient permitted to use grape juice, but I have now obtained a dispensation for all alcoholic priests that they may use grape juice. Incidentally, that provision is now part of the Catholic Church, and that is my contribution to the Catholic Church. Right? But my friends, perhaps I'm even envious of that system. But no one has the right to make a dispensation on one word of Torah. Within the limits of the halacha, we have some latitude in which we can operate. But you cannot ask me to change that which is not my prerogative to change. And you see, as a result of the fact that some people find these changes to be uncomfortable, we have developed a divisiveness, and I can do nothing about it. Now, let me tell you that I have no right to make any dispensations regarding kosher, non-kosher, observing Shabbos, not observing Shabbos. That's not my... However, if someone chooses not to observe Shabbat, or someone chooses not to eat kosher, even though I may feel that he is not observing the Torah, that in itself is not so terribly divisive as if he enters into a marriage where the children, according to halacha, will not be considered Jewish, and I can't do anything about that. And that child will not be able to marry my grandchild. That child may later on find that they wish to go to a yeshiva or they wish to go to a seminary, and this has happened quite often. And later find out that they cannot intermarry because the mother's conversion was not proper. And the conversion issue is one which sets up a divisiveness and will split our people into two nations, something that should not be permitted to happen. And you say, well, why don't you yield? I will if somebody will tell me that I can. But there is no authority, there is no pope. Even the Sanhedrin, when it existed, did not have the authority to override one word of Torah. So you see, my friends, I will make whatever sacrifice there is for Jewish unity. But the one thing that I cannot understand really is those to whom Jewish unity should be so dear, but because of their own feelings, whatever they are unwilling to yield and preserve Jewish unity. What can I say? There is nothing in the world that is painful and is as destructive as Jewish unity, as Jewish disunity. And it happened from the time of Moses on. For one brief time when we received the Torah, all hearts were one. I have a feeling, and I spoke a little bit about it this morning, and we talked about spirituality, that whereas we are different in body, we are one in soul. Now, of course, Hashem breathed a soul into us. This is what the Torah tells us in the creation of man. Hashem, Almighty God, breathed of himself into us. So that every Jewish person has as his neshama a part of Almighty God. And since Almighty God is absolute unity, therefore all our souls are one. Mine and yours and yours and yours and yours and yours. We are all one. There's no distinction, no separation. Yes, but you are not, we are really not all one. I'm sitting here and you're there. Next week I will be in the United States, you will be thousands of miles away. How are we one if we are separate? We are separate in body, but we are one in soul. Which means that as long as I continue to emphasize my body with its needs, with its gratifications, I am emphasizing that part of my existence that separates us. My body is separate from yours. The more I can turn away from my own conveniences, from my own comforts, from my own gratifications, and look toward gratifications and fulfillment of the soul, of the spirit, to that degree we become one. This is so simple. What stands in the way of Jewish unity? The fact that so many people from all areas of Judaism may be looking for their own physical comforts, for their own personal gratifications, rather than for fulfillment of the neshama of the soul. And I have firm belief that if we learn to emphasize our neshama at the cost of even some of our gratifications and physical comforts, we will come to that unity of the soul that will make us truly one again. And it is when we will be one with each other that we will truly be one with God. So, my friends, there's many things I do not justify. I do not justify any zealousness. There are terms that I use, the right, the left, whatever. Wherever zealousness and fanaticism enters, I leave. And I believe that the mainstream of Judaism, perhaps 99% of it, believe the way I do. But we may have one tiny element on either extreme of the bell curve, one tiny element that is very vocal. And unfortunately, today, anyone can grab a microphone and speak. Anyone can call a press conference and make statements. Anyone can make an opinion on the media, and who is to know who is saying what? And so we have to be extremely cautious about who is saying what that represents who. And I think that if we will keep an open mind, look to emphasize our neshamas, our souls, with our spiritual endeavors and strivings, and be willing to look away from our physical comforts, we can achieve that unity. You know, way back in the days of the Baal Shem Tov and the other great tzaddikim, there were many of our pious saints who used to indulge in fasting, something which they later, tzaddikim, which the later Torah authorities told us we are not to do, other than the prescribed fast, Tisha B'Av, Yom Kippur, and so forth. But not to take upon ourselves voluntary flagellation. But I wonder, why did they do it then? And I think the reason they did it then was that this was their way of trying to de-emphasize the primacy of their physical selves. It is not for us to indulge in physical self-flagellation anymore. We don't have the strength to do that. But by the same reason, we should not go overboard in physical indulgence as Western civilization has done. And I firmly believe that to the degree that we will be able to emphasize and strive for spiritual fulfillment, we will fulfill that element which brings us together, because our neshamas are truly one. And our neshamas are truly one regardless of where we stand on the spectrum of observance. And the teachings of the Baal Shem Tov, I think, are extremely relevant. That there be unconditional love among us, even when it is sometimes necessary for us to disagree. And so I'm hoping that by striving for greater spirituality, as is the purpose of this encounter, that we will search for spirituality with absolute truth and not be diverted into any other kind of bias other than to find the ultimate truth. And since truth is identified with God, when we will search for truth, we will find God. And as the great Rebbe of Kotsk has said, the Torah tells us, you will search for God and you will find him. And the Rebbe of Kotsk said, the searching is the finding. There is no pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. And I have often told people, when you search for spirituality, you have found it. Once you believe you have found it, you have probably lost it. So you and I together have to go on searching. As I told you at the beginning, I have to look at the improvement of my mitzvot, so that after I fulfill a mitzvah, my Ahavat Yisrael is greater than it was before, for otherwise it was lacking in completion. And I am certain that by doing so, we will enrich our spiritual lives, we will emphasize that faction of our being, that component of our being that is the neshama that makes us one, and we will truly achieve the unity that will bring us the merit to be deserving of the ultimate redemption. May it come speedily and in our own time. Thank you.
In December 1997, the first Manchester Encounter Conference attracted over 1,000 people each night for 3 nights to the beautiful Whitworth Hall at the University of Manchester. This success was repeated 1 year later, and on Saturday night, 6th December 1998, the Chief Rabbi Dr. Jonathan Sachs enthralled the 1,200-strong audience with an important keynote lecture entitled The Search for Jewish Self.
Kvod HaRabbanim, ladies and gentlemen, I love the way you do things in Manchester. You know, your Rabbanim said, let's have a few friends around, talk a little Torah. And when you do something in Manchester, you do it seriously. I must tell you, it is freezing outside, but there is nowhere on earth as warm as the Manchester Jewish community. I congratulate you on this wonderful further demonstration. Last year was just a knockout, and this year, just as good. Is further demonstration that Manchester Jewish life is the great hope for the future, and may you continue Ko Yosef Hashem. What were you saying about launching a ship? You know how the Queen launches a ship. Breaks a bottle of champagne, the Royal Navy shout out Mazel Tov, and the ship is launched. However, let me begin with a story which you remind me of by your own story, about Jewish students confessing their identity. I was very struck by a story told by the late Shlomo Carlebach. You know, Shlomo Carlebach was a great singer, folk singer, raconteur, who went around campuses throughout America, throughout the world, speaking about spirituality, about religion, telling Hasidic stories, singing his own songs. And he said something once that just fascinated me. He said, you know what is the problem with Jewish life? He said this: when I go around the campus and I ask students, what are you? Kid gets up and says, I'm a Catholic. I know that's a Catholic. Kid gets up and says, I'm a Protestant. I know that's a Protestant. Kid gets up and says, I'm just a human being. I know that's a Jew. And what I want to do tonight is ask how that ever came to be. And I want to ask you to think very hard this evening and ask how we got such a strange, conflicted Jewish identity. And in order to take you into the subject, I want to ask you to travel back with me in time just over 500 years to a moment which I find utterly fascinating. We are journeying back to the second half of the 15th century, to a region of Spain called Aragon, to a town called Calatayud, where there lived a rabbi called Isaac ben Moses Arama, 15th century Spain. The Rabbi Arama, is already famous, although he's still quite young, for his sermons. His sermons are famous. They're also very long, but that's another subject, because they are not just the usual divrei Torah. They are very philosophical, and they go into really the most fundamental issues of Judaism. They are, in case you're interested, still available today in a book called Akedas Yitzchak by Rabbi Isaac Arama. Now, Rabbi Arama used to do, as rabbis still to do today, to begin his sermon by asking a question. And then he would develop a chakira, a long investigation, and finally arrive at an answer. And the week that we have arrived at in our little time travel is just before Rosh Hashanah, when we are reading the Sedra of Nitzavim. Remember how that Sedra begins. Moses says, Atem Nitzavim Ayom Kulchem Lifnei Hashem Elokeichem. He assembles all the people together and says, you are all gathered here, together before God, your heads, your tribes, your elders, your officers, everyone in Israel. La'ovrecha bivrit Hashem Elokecha uvalato, to make you pass through or enter into the covenant with Hashem and with his oath. And then he says some famous words. Lo itechem levadachem anochi koret et habrit hazot ve'et ha'ala hazot. Not with you alone do I make this covenant and this oath. Ki et asher yeshno po imanu omed hayom lifnei Hashem Elokeinu. I am making it with all those people who are here today. Ve'et asher enenu po imanu hayom. And also with those who are not here today. In other words, Moses was, at the end of his life, going to renew the covenant that had been made a generation earlier at Mount Sinai. But this time, as the Israelites just about to cross into the land, which he will not himself live to do, he includes in the covenant not only the people there, but also et asher enenu po hayom, the people who aren't there today, which, as our Jewish tradition has always understood, means the generations not yet born. So here is a passage fundamental to Judaism, namely that the covenant at Sinai was not for that time alone, but would be eternal. It would bind not only Jews in the days of Moses, but all future generations. And so it does to this day, because we don't become Jews, we are born Jews, and the reason that we are born into obligations is, says the Gemara, that we are mushpa v'omed misinai. It's as if we were already forsworn at Sinai. You and I are already bound by events that happened long ago. That is the passage. Now, as Isaac Arama is sitting in his study thinking about what to say in Shul that Shabbos, he notices a problem which becomes the theme of his sermon. And I want you to listen very carefully to this problem as he articulates it. He says the following thing. He says, how can a decision be made on the part of a generation at a particular time and place? How can that obligation bind future generations? How can I obligate my grandchildren not yet born? Think about it. An obligation presupposes consent, agreement. If I make a promise to you, then I'm bound by that promise. I'm bound by my promises. But am I bound by my parents' promises or my grandparents' promises? Clearly not. I wasn't consulted, I didn't agree, I'm not bound by them. Technically, we have a rule in Judaism. Zachin la'adam shelo b'fanav. I can give somebody a gift, a benefit, without seeking his agreement. Because we assume that it's because it's a benefit, he or she will agree. But we also have a rule, ein chavin la'adam shelo b'fanav. We don't impose a penalty or a liability on somebody without their agreement, because, after all, since it's a liability, we need to check that that person agrees. Now we have to ask, is it a zechut or a chovah to be a Jew? Is it a benefit or is it a liability? The answer is, of course, in many ways it's a zechus. It's a great thing to be a Jew. But in some respects, it's also a very demanding thing. The Gemara says when somebody comes to convert, the Beis Din asks them, are you sure you really want to do this? Because until now you could eat whatever you like. Once you become a Jew, there'll be things you can't eat. Until now you could do whatever you like on Shabbos. Once you become a Jew, there'll be things you can't do. And therefore, since there are chovot, since there are obligations, you can't become a convert unless you agree. I have to agree in order to be obligated. So therefore, asks Rabbi Yitzchak Harama a very simple question. How can we be born Jews? How can we be born with obligations to keep the mitzvahs? How can we be mushba v'omed misinai? How can I be obligated by something that happened long ago and far away? After all, I wasn't consulted. I didn't agree. Do you follow the question? It is a very, very profound question. How could Moses make a covenant with generations not yet born? Now, if you understand the question, and you can go through the book and read it very carefully, you will see that Isaac Arama has asked how there can be a Brit Olam, an everlasting covenant. And that is a question that goes to the very heart of Jewish identity. In fact, what Isaac Arama is asking is nothing other than the question, why should I be a Jew? And it is interesting that another commentator asks the same question on the same passage. The commentator known as Don Yitzchak Abarbanel. And the reason that Don Yitzchak Abarbanel asked the same question is that Don Yitzchak Abarbanel lived in the same place at the same time in Spain in the second half of the 15th century. Now what is interesting is not the answer that Arama gives to the question or the answer that Abarbanel gives to the question. What is interesting is the question. And I want to explain why. And the reason this question is interesting is simple, that nobody ever asked it before. At least for the previous 1,000 years. We know that the Tanaim, the Amoraim, the Savoraim, the Gaonim, the Rishonim, all the sages of Judaism from the time of the Mishnah to the Middle Ages, all of them asked almost every single conceivable question. Except one. There is one question they never asked. And that question is, why should I be a Jew? And the reason they never asked it is because the answer was obvious. Why should I be a Jew? Because my parents were Jewish, my grandparents were Jewish, and so on back through the generations, all the way back to Sinai. It's a crazy question. The answer is obvious. However, once you ask the question, then it is a difficult question to answer. And now I want to ask the real question. Why, if this question had not been asked for well over 1,000 years, maybe longer, was it suddenly asked just then and just there? Why, if this question could have been asked at any time, was it not asked at any time and was only asked in Spain in the 15th century? That is a very interesting question. And the answer is this. We have just commemorated the 60th anniversary of Kristallnacht. What you may not know is that in 1391, a Kristallnacht took place in Spain. In Spain, where Jews had lived in relative prosperity and relative freedom for many centuries. In 1391, an exact precursor of Kristallnacht took place. Throughout the country, there were anti-Jewish riots. Shuls were burned. Jewish businesses were looted. Many Jews were killed. And from that day onwards, there began a systematic persecution of Jews that lasted for 101 years. For 1 century, there were waves of attempts to convert the Jews. Those who converted were offered equal citizenship, but those who didn't convert, those who stayed Jews, were confined to special areas, the first ghettos. They had to wear distinctive clothing, a forerunner of the yellow star of the Nazi era. They were barred from public life. They were forbidden to live with Christians, mix with Christians. And in 1492, 101 years later, all of this culminated in the expulsion of Jews from Spain. For 100 years, Jews were persecuted. And for almost the first time in Jewish history, many Jews converted. Many Jews. We know that some stayed Jews in secret. They were called the conversos, or the anusim, or perhaps you're more familiar with the term that the Spanish used, which was marranos. Some were Jews in secret, others just became Christians. Those who converted prospered, those who stayed Jewish suffered. And this was a crisis in Jewish life. The worst crisis since the destruction of the Second Temple, and there was nothing like it again until the Holocaust. What kind of a crisis was it? Obviously, it was an economic crisis, a political crisis, a physical crisis, but it was also a spiritual crisis. Because, for the first time, the Jews who stayed Jewish had to ask the question, why do we stay Jewish? When so many of our brethren are leaving the faith. And for the first time, the answer that you're Jewish because your parents were Jewish and your grandparents were Jewish, it wasn't enough. And that is why a question that could have been asked at any time in Jewish history was simply never asked until the 15th century in Spain. To put it simply, when Jews ask, why should I be Jewish? When Jews go in search of the Jewish self, we are in the presence of a major crisis in Jewish life. A crisis that has in fact occurred very rarely in the 4,000 years of Jewish history. And that is where we are today. In the last 2 years in the United States, at the very least, a half a dozen books have been published with titles like Why Be Jewish? Why Stay Jewish? Does the World Need the Jews? There are at least half a dozen of them and many more on the way. Isaac Arama's question, which remained dormant for the last 500 years, which appeared 550 years ago and then disappeared, has come alive again. Because just as in 15th century Spain, as almost never before in our history, Jews are leaving Judaism. Between 1 in 3 and 1 in 2 young Jews in the diaspora is deciding not to live as Jews, not to marry as Jews, not to bring up children as Jews. And when people ask why be Jewish, we are in the presence of a major crisis. And that crisis is ultimately a spiritual one. And of course, what is truly dramatic about our present situation is that unlike 15th century Spain, where all of this was happening in the context of persecution, today it is taking place in the context of freedom, affluence, tolerance, and civic equality. It's an unbelievable situation that we are living through today. Let me tell you a story. You know, I go around inducting rabbis. I wish they'd stay in office a bit longer. A couple of years ago, I did an induction in a little suburb in London. It was a terribly pucker English Conservative MP. That was just before the last general election, when there were still Conservative MPs. And this fellow came up to me after the induction. I'd never met him before. It's a fascinating story. And he said, "Chief Rabbi, I'm so glad you're here." He said, "My wife has been dying to meet you. She's Jewish, you know." I want you to listen to this story. It's one of the most remarkable things that ever happened to me. What was the story? 550 years before, her ancestors had converted to Christianity. They came from medieval Spain. They had never converted back again. For more than 5 centuries, her family had been Christians. In all that time, they never once forgot that they were once Jews. To the point that she was waiting to meet somebody, the chief rabbi, so she could tell me her story, that she had once been Jewish. Her family had once been Jewish. Can you imagine that? And yet today, young Jews are walking away from their Jewish identity as if that heritage, that identity, that history were nothing. And there's no pressure for them to do so. For heaven's sake, in most countries of the diaspora, Jews are among the most affluent, the most educated, the most successful of any religious group there is. For once, in economic and political terms, to be a Jew is a zechus. It's a tremendous advantage. It's not a liability. The Gemara tells us in Yevamot that when somebody came to convert, the Beis Din said to them, "Don't you know? Iata Yodea, Yisrael, the Vuyin, the Chufin, the Muturafin, the Surin Boin Aleihem. Don't you know that Jews have suffered and they persecute and troubles come upon them day after day?" That doesn't apply anymore. It doesn't apply anymore. The whole tone of Jewish life has changed. You know, in the Haim, they used to be philosophical about all the sorrows of Jewish life. You know, the lovely little conversation from the Yiddish sage in Chelm, who, thinking about Jewish history, said, "You know, probably it would have been better not to have been born. But how many are so lucky? Not 1 in 1,000. Today, Baruch Hashem, to be Jewish confers every advantage. And yet Jews are walking away. And what I want to ask is, how did it happen? And once we understand how it happens, we will know what the solution is. I can obviously only tonight sketch an answer in the broadest of strokes. But let me preface it with a little hakdama, a little preface. Sometimes a whole life can be wasted, can be spent in pursuit of an illusion. That life is destined to end in tears. And yet it happens not rarely, but quite often. And not just to ordinary people, but to some very intelligent people indeed. We have a whole book in the Torah dedicated to that proposition. It's called Koheles, Ecclesiastes. We read it on Sukkot. You remember Koheles? Koheles was the man who had everything. Had a Rolls and a Lamborghini for every day in the week. He had a second home in the south of France, a pied-à-terre in Manhattan. He had a collection second to none of French Impressionists, and he discovered that Monet can't buy you love. And, all right, I will go back to London immediately. A brilliant guy, Shlomo HaMelech, spends half of his life in pursuit of an illusion, the illusion that what I am is what I own. Which makes plausible sense, but in the end is nothing other than a fallacy. And only later in life does he discover the truth that Ben Zoma articulated in Pirkei Avos, Ezehu Ashir, Hasameach B'chelko. Who is rich, who rejoices in what he has. Now that happens to many lives, in many illusions. A life can be destined to failure because it is built on a conceptual error. And if we don't think hard enough, we can waste our whole life. I've never said this in public before, but I'm going to say it tonight. I believe that much of Jewish life in the past 200 years has been built on a series of such mistakes. And sometimes the people who make them are very bright indeed. I want to just consider 3 approaches to Jewish identity which are very widely held in the big wide Jewish world, which are held by intelligent, thoughtful, even admirable people, but which are simply doomed to failure because they don't add up. Here is the first one, and it's perfectly illustrated by a certain columnist in a certain Jewish newspaper. I hesitate to name it, but you remember there was a space occupied by the late Chaim Berman, of blessed memory. He was a good guy who sometimes liked to pretend he wasn't a good guy, but there's a certain columnist who's taken over that space. Nice fellow, I met him, he's a courageous guy, nice guy. But for this columnist, if you've read his columns, just as for Achad Ha'am in Eastern Europe a century ago, or a rabbi called Mordechai Kaplan in the United States in the first half of the 20th century, for all these people, being Jewish is a matter of culture. To be a Jew means liking certain kind of food, a certain kind of humor, a certain kind of experiences, certain kind of ethnicity. You like Woody Allen, you like Kugel, you like klezmer, you're a Jew. That is the definition. Cultural Jew. Now, the people who hold this view, as I say, can be very serious and have a great deal of integrity. What is more, there are whole movements, whole institutions in Israel and in the diaspora dedicated to this proposition. Let me give you an example. I recently persuaded the Hebrew University in Israel to set up a conference on Jewish identity, which I hope will take place next summer. The academic staff of the Hebrew University, whom I admire tremendously, immediately, without even thinking, wrote down on the program for the conference the following titles: Zahut Tarbutit Shel Am Yisrael, the cultural identity of the Jewish people. They assume that if I'm talking about identity, I must be talking about culture. Now, if we just stop to think for 1 minute, we would see it can't be so. Why? Let me say in the first person singular, I admire the writings of Plato and Aristotle. I love, in their very different ways, the music of Beethoven and of Ravel and Debussy. I love the novels of Leo Tolstoy. But that does not make me Greek or German or French or Russian. And vice versa. You don't have to be Jewish. What do they say? You don't, we were saying this evening, you don't have to be Jewish to drive a Volvo. There's a comedian I know him quite well actually, called Jackie Mason. You've heard of Jackie Mason? I used to love him in the old days. He had this wonderful way back in the 60s, when I was a student, of beginning his talk. He used to begin he always began his show like this. He said, "I may start slowly, but little by little, I die out completely." Anyway, Jackie Mason is absolutely convinced you have to be Jewish to understand Jackie Mason's jokes. So happened a few years ago, he invited me to his show, and for some reason, they stuck me Elena and I in the royal box. No, please, no more letters to the Jewish Chronicle. Please. So our muzzle, this box, is right next to the other box where the guy who operates the lights, the floodlight, whatever, is standing. This is a non-Jewish guy. He's the local electrician. And we spent, Elaine and I, our whole evening tittering because we were worried he's going to fall out of the box because he's laughing, killing himself. Non-Jew about Jackie. You don't have to be Jewish to like Jewish humor. You don't have to be Jewish to like chickens. At least I don't think so. Let me tell you something more. You don't have to be Jewish to be moved by the Holocaust. I was asked by the BBC a couple of years ago to make a program from Auschwitz. Very difficult experience. I found that a shattering experience. It changed my life. But I have to tell you, I went there with a non-Jewish crew from here in Manchester, from the BBC. Non-Jewish crew. And I have to say, in all honesty, they were every bit as moved, every bit as shattered as I was. The truth is that the Holocaust is a Jewish tragedy, but it is also a human tragedy. And it is quite wrong for us to think that only we can mourn and grieve for it. Indeed, as you probably saw in yesterday's papers, the government is proposing a national Holocaust Memorial Day, which I have supported. And I believe that all of humanity is charged with the mitzvah of remembering, of zachor. So you will understand that culture does not cut to the core of identity. If I can explain it very simply, my culture tells me ma anochi, but not mi anochi. It tells me what I am, but it doesn't tell me who I am. Actually, I'm not sure if there is such a thing as Jewish culture. That I don't know. Have you ever heard, for instance, the music of 15th century Spain? You ever heard it? You can buy records of it now, CDs of it. I tell you, it doesn't sound Jewish to me. Because it doesn't sound East European. I don't know if there is such a thing as Jewish culture, but this I know. Even if it was extremely simple to say that is Jewish culture, it would not define what is a Jew. And the reason is very simple. Culture does not obligate. Culture does not command. What is culture like? I'll tell you exactly. You got a tremendous library here. What's it called? Ryland's Library. You have a super library here. You go into this library, it's full of books. You take out a book, you can take out any one of 1 million books. You sit, you read it. You can be totally absorbed in it. It can engage you totally. It can even change you a little for the rest of your life. But at the end of the day, you put that book back on the shelf, you walk away, that book makes no claim on you. That book does not command. That is what culture is like. You enter into a painting, a concert, a novel, whatever it is. It's like taking a book out of the... You put it back. It does not define who you are because it does not obligate. Any Jewish movement that makes culture the basis of Jewish identity will fail, guaranteed, I say this with absolute certainty, because it is based on a conceptual mistake. Culture can never be the basis of an answer, who am I? That is the first error. And many people made it. Whole movements were built. And they're still making it today. Secondly, another kind of approach. And this I will introduce by way of a story. Maaseh Shehaya, it actually happened this way. In 1995, some people were kind enough to give me something called the Jerusalem Prize. It's a very nice prize. You go to Israel on Yom Yerushalayim, you make a speech in Ivrit in the Knesset. It's a big yichus. If you get offered it, take it. It's nice. And the next day, they make a reception in your honor in Beit HaNasi in the president's house. And so the president of Israel made a little reception in our honor. My family was there. He made a speech in my honor. Luckily, it was in Ivrit, so my parents didn't understand a word. Because in this speech, he, in his unique way, he said, Chinuch Torani, and you know, Rav Rashi קיבל את הפרס, תרומתו לחינוך תורני בגולה. I see the chief rabbi has received the award because of his contribution to Torah education in the diaspora. He said, Chinuch Torani זה יותר טוב מכלום, אבל, he said, religious education is better than nothing, but. After that speech, I came back and I had breakfast with the Israeli ambassador, and I said, Ambassador Kavod HaShagrir, and now I understand how it is that after 4,000 years, the Hebrew language does still not have a word that means tact. And it doesn't, actually. Anyway, having made this lovely introduction, he then proceeded to make a long speech, the argument of which is that what is needed in the diaspora is a network of secular Jewish schools in which the most important thing on the curriculum will be teaching Ivrit, teaching the Hebrew language. Now, this is actually a very interesting suggestion, that the Hebrew language will keep Jewish identity alive. And I don't know if you're aware of it, but there was a whole movement in the 19th and early 20th century. Many schools were built on that basis that said the Yiddish language will keep Jewish identity alive. They were called Yiddish culturalist schools. And there were many of them in the States. I don't know if we had any in England, but language will keep an identity alive. Now, this is a mistake made by great minds, by the President of the State of Israel. It is a mistake. And you can see why. A language is never in and of itself the basis of an identity. You can have an identity without a language, you can have a language without an identity. It's very simple. In Switzerland, they have a national identity, a Swiss identity, but they don't have a common language. They have three languages, am I right? They have three languages in Switzerland. Four languages. Four? What's the fourth? French, German, Italian. One? Romanian. Very well. Excellent. Four languages, but none of it. I must say, seeing Swiss talking together must be like seeing Yidden talking together. A lot of speaking, not a lot of understanding, but at any rate. Anyway, so you can have an identity without a common language. In the other direction, as you know, you can have a common language without a common identity. You remember the famous saying of George Bernard Shaw about the United States and Britain, two countries divided by a common language. And that suggests to us that close though language may come to identity, it is neither a necessary nor a sufficient condition for it. And that's pretty obvious. Paddy Ashdown, I don't know if you know this, leader of the Liberal Democrats, is a fluent speaker of Mandarin, but believe it or not, that doesn't make him a Chinaman. To put it at its simplest, you don't have to be Jewish to speak Ivrit. You don't have to be Jewish to speak Ivrit. That is what Israel is rapidly discovering, as you probably know. Today in Israel, there are, at the very least, 200,000 Russian Olim who are living in Israel, who speak Ivrit, who are Israeli citizens, who participate in every facet of national life, but they're not Jewish. Not Jewish by any definition. And their number is growing every day. So it doesn't make even the slightest sense to say Ivrit is the basis of Jewish identity. And in fact, we can put it rather more deeply and more generally than that. It is not identification with Israel that makes us Jews. It is the fact that we are Jews that makes us identify with Israel. And so the idea of a network of schools in the diaspora teaching Hebrew as a second language, the thought that that is going to turn us into Jews, is as crazy as the fact that, at least in my day, I presume still today, in virtually every school in Britain, French is taught as a second language, the fact that that turns us into Frenchmen. The fact is that if one thought about it for 1 minute, you would see that this is an error. And yet, millions of pounds are spent on this error, which must fail. That doesn't mean to say I don't think that every Jew should learn Ivrit. Of course I do. But to think that has something to do with Jewish identity, that is the answer to who I am as a Jew, not at all. Of course we must learn Ivrit for the simple reason that all Jews must be able to communicate with one another. But that is not what makes us Jews. Now, here I come to the third option. Not culture, not language, but something else. And this third error is truly catastrophic. This is truly catastrophic. This is at the heart of Shlomo Carlebach's joke. How is it that Catholics and Protestants do not find it embarrassing to say they're Catholics or Protestants, but Jews find it problematic to be upfront about the fact that they are Jews? Can you imagine any other culture that would have something like, funny you don't look Jewish, as a compliment? Think about that. Think about that. We are very ambivalent about our own identity. Do you know the most profound remark ever made in the 20th century about Jewish identity, which in and of itself explains the current intermarriage rates, was coined by a great Jewish thinker called Marx. Groucho Marx, who said, and you all know this, it's one of the most famous sayings of this century, I wouldn't dream of belonging to a club that would let me in as a member. Now think about that. That is the most ambivalent, even self-hating remark it is possible to make. And from that, there is only one release, which is to leave Yiddishkeit. Because the club that would have us as a member is the Jewish people. And I don't want to belong to it. All of the ambivalence of Jewish identity is there. How did it happen? And here I come to the third and most tragic mistake about Jewish identity. I want to say a word about something called anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism is the greatest crime of the modern world, and almost every Jewish family in the world, certainly every Jewish family in this room, but almost every Jew in the world has been affected by it one way or another, whether it is the pogroms and the May-laws that broke out in Eastern Europe, sending between 3 and 5 million Jews into flight to Britain and to the West between 1880 and 1914, where most of Anglo-Jewry came here, or it is the Shoah, which not only destroyed 2/3 of the Jews of Europe, but left a trauma, a mark of trauma on all of us, or it is the post-Holocaust anti-Zionism that has affected Jews living in Arab lands. One way or another, we have all been affected by anti-Semitism. This we know. But what we often forget is that anti-Semitism not only affects bodies, it also affects minds. It leaves its wounds and its scars in murderous attacks on Jews physically, but it also affects us spiritually. It leaves psychological traces. And why did this happen? Because something happened in the 19th century which very few people noticed. Even today we don't fully understand it, and I am going to define it. In the 19th century, Jews stopped defining themselves by reference to heaven and started defining themselves by reference to their neighbors. How had Jews defined themselves? All the way through their history until a century ago. I will tell you in these words, which we say every Yom Tov. Ata b'chatanu mikol ha'amim, ahavta otanu, ratzita banu. We were the people loved by God. All of a sudden, in the 19th century, we substituted a new and terrible definition. We were the people who are hated by the Gentiles. And at the second that happened, anti-Semitism stopped being just something out there and became also something in here. And to this day, you see the traces of that attitude. To this day, everywhere you go in the Jewish world. Certainly, if you travel throughout the United States today, what will you see? You will see an unbelievable, intense activity of creating Holocaust museums, Holocaust courses, Holocaust conferences, Holocaust books, Holocaust memorials. 1 in every 4 books published in a Jewish theme in America is on the Shoah. 1 in every 4 university programs on Jewish studies is on the Holocaust. Now look, I want again to be clear. I certainly believe every Jew, every child, every human child, not only every Jewish child, has to learn about the Shoah. But to think that that is the basis of who we are, that is more than a confusion, that is a tragedy. Lucy Davidovitz, who was the first great Holocaust historian, towards the end of her life regretted the fact that she had publicized the Shoah so much, that it had become part of children's school education. She said, what is going to happen today, tomorrow? Kids will go to school and they will learn about the Greeks and how they lived, about the Romans and how they lived, and about the Jews and how they died. Tragedy, anti-Semitism is something that happens to Jews. But God forbid that that should be what makes us Jews, because that defines us as a nation of victims. And I don't know whether you or I can live with this idea. Maybe we can. But one thing is for sure, that not one of us can seriously wish that fate on our children or our grandchildren. If we are defined by anti-Semitism, in the end we will only be half sorry when our children marry out, God forbid. Now that is the real heart of our dilemma. I have spoken about 3 kinds of Jewish identity which have enormous prominence in the world today, but which are cases of mistaken identity. Mistaken in the most simple and fundamental sense that they are incoherent, they are logically misconceived. Nothing can make sense out of them. And yet great minds have made these mistakes. Millions, even billions of pounds have been spent on them, and whole institutions have been predicated on them, and whole generations have been lost because of them. And I weep at the waste of money, energy, and time. But even worse, I weep at the loss of millions of Jews, who, because they are told that is what it is to be a Jew, can't see any sense of it. Let me be clear. I intend no comparison, God forbid, between assimilation and genocide. But it is still a sobering fact that the Jewish people lost 6 million lives in the Shoah. In 1945, there were 12 million Jews. By any, even the most conservative estimates of normal demographic population growth, today there should be 24 million Jews. There are today 12 million Jews. Somehow 12 million Jews are missing since the end of the Holocaust. And that is the tragedy of what happens when we live our life in pursuit of an illusion. There is only one coherent answer to the question Isaac Arama asked in the 15th century, and to the question we ask today, why are we Jews? And the answer is not because Hashem commanded our parents, not because Hashem commanded our grandparents, but because Hashem commands us. Hashem speaks to us, asking us to bring the Shekhinah, the divine presence, into the world by the Torah we learn, the mitzvahs we fulfill, the lives we lead, the homes we build, the communities we create. And the strange thing is that non-Jews understand this very well indeed. Let me give you a tiny little example that that I encountered just 2 or 3 days ago. And I find this an eloquent example. This is just a tiny little example. There is in America a young law professor called Stephen L. Carter, law professor at Yale, black law professor in his early 40s. And he has just published in the United States, it's not sold here, but I've been reading it, a book called Civility. It's a black Lutheran law professor. And in this book, which is about citizenship and civility, he tells a story that he tells us changed his life. Here is the story. I don't know, have any of you been to Washington? Any of you been to Washington? You will know that Washington is a very ghettoized city. It's a very beautiful city, but go around the suburbs, it's very ghettoized. There are white areas, there are black areas. Anyway, when he was about 8 years old, his family moved to a white area in Washington because his father was a lawyer working for the government. They moved into a white area. They were the only black family in this entire area. This is many years ago. This was 30-odd years, 35 years ago. He says it was terrible. The kids were sitting there watching all the neighbors walking by, and nobody said a word to them. Nobody even looked at them. It was as if they were invisible. He tells how he was sitting with his brothers and sisters on the steps of the house, crying and saying to himself, nobody wants us here, nobody is going to make friends of us here, we should never have moved. And then he says, a lady walked by and gave us a big smile and said, welcome. And then she disappeared in her house opposite theirs. And came out 5 minutes later with a big tray of cakes and sandwiches, which she brought over to the kids and befriended them. He says this changed his life, taught him values to live by for the rest of his life, and that's why he wrote that book. Here was a woman, he said, who took the trouble to say hello to a stranger, and a black stranger at that. Her name, he says, was Sarah Kestenbaum. As it happens, a relative of the Jonathan Kestenbaum, who used to work for me, now runs UJIA. And he goes on to say this. Listen to this. Black Lutheran law professor. He goes on to say this. He says, the reason why Jews do this sort of thing, he says, is because they're commanded to. It is what Jews call chesed. And Sarah Kestenbaum was a very religious lady. And I thought to myself, Rabbanu Shalom, Moshe Rabbeinu was right. When he said to the Israelites, keep this Torah, Gihi chochmatchem uvinatchem la'einei ha'amim, because this is your wisdom and greatness in the eyes of the nations. He never said it was your greatness and wisdom in your own eyes. He knew Jews are a little harder. But what a Kiddush Hashem. And how beautifully this Yale law professor, Lutheran, understood instantly what is Jewish identity. Friends, it could be that in Manchester I'm speaking to the converted, and yet I still feel it is time to speak. Et ledaber. Because I see throughout Anglo Jewry, American Jewry, Israel itself, various efforts here and there on the part of the media, on the part of intellectuals, on the part of policy institutes, to secularize and yet further secularize Jewish identity and Jewish life, to see Jewish life in terms of culture, or language, or consciousness of anti-Semitism. And maybe it's done with the best of intentions. Perhaps they truly believe that only by secularizing Judaism can you speak to Jews in what is, by any standards, a secular age. But it is a mistake. And it will lead to much heartbreak and much wasted effort and many disillusioned lives. I don't know how you program these new mobile phones, of which I see, they all play symphony or concerts nowadays. But this I know, that after you've been trying for 2 hours to program one of these things, that wonderful aphorism comes into my mind: when all else fails, read the instructions. When all else fails, read the Torah. Read Jewish history, read anything you like, and you will find that the only coherent view of Jewish identity ever formulated is contained in 4 words, which all of us know: Asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu. We were the people, we are Jews, because God summoned us to be holy through His commands, and He commanded us. If the word v'tzivanu, if the concept of command, obligation, does not appear in our definition of Jewish identity, then I guarantee you, within 3 generations, it will fail. And not all the programs, institutes, and billions of pounds will save it. The only way to survive, the only answer to what is a Jew, contains the word mitzvah. And with this, I conclude by the most striking proof of all, the proof that comes from this time of the Jewish calendar, the proof of Hanukkah itself. I'm sure you probably know that Hanukkah is, amongst all the festivals of the Jewish year, unique in one respect, that there is not one version of Hanukkah, there are 2. The first story of Hanukkah you will find written in the apocryphal books 1 and 2 of the Maccabees, and in the prayer that we say on Hanukkah, Al Hanissim. That story of Hanukkah concerns a great military victory, the greatest military victory in the ancient world, not just in Jewish history, but in ancient history, of how a small group of Jews under the Maccabees defeated the greatest empire of their time, the Alexandrian Empire of Greece. That is story 1. Story 2, which is contained in a little scroll, it's recorded in the Talmud, it's contained in a scroll called Megillat Ta'anit, and recorded in the Talmud, and represented by the mitzvah of Hadlokas Haneros, lighting the menorah on Hanukkah. It's a quite different story of how one defiled cruse of oil was found in the temple, and how miraculously it lasted 8 days instead of 1, and that is represented today in the mitzvah of lighting the menorah. 2 different stories. 250 years later, 250 years after Hanukkah, the 2 stories were put to the test. You see, 250 years later, 235 years later, the Second Temple was destroyed. The temple which the Maccabees had rededicated was in ruins. The independence that they had won was lost, and stayed lost until 1948. And the Talmud records a remarkable fact. The rabbis voted to abolish Hanukkah. The Talmud says so. Batla Megillat Ta'anit. Hanukkah is abolished, and all other minor festivals with it. Hanukkah was abolished nearly 2,000 years ago. So why do we keep Hanukkah? I'll tell you. The people refused to obey the rabbis. And do you know why? Because the Gemara says, Mishum deika mitzvah. There's a mitzvah on Hanukkah. And nobody was willing to give up the mitzvah. What was the mitzvah? Lighting Hanukkah candles, lighting a menorah. But people refused to give up the mitzvah. Isn't this a fantastic thing? The greatest military victory in the ancient world didn't last. But one mitzvah did last. And it lasted to this day. And that is why we celebrate Hanukkah today. I tell you, Jews could be the most powerful nation on all of the earth, and yet we would not survive, just as other greatest nations in the past didn't survive. Ancient Egypt, ancient Mesopotamia, Greece, Rome, they came, they rose, they disappeared. But we could be the smallest nation on earth, and believe me, we are the smallest nation on earth, as somebody once said. The total population of world Jewry is smaller than the statistical error in the Chinese census. We're a very tiny people. And yet, as long as we say the word V'tzivanu, the Jewish people will survive until the end of time. We're a small people, but our influence is vast, and our future is safe. Why? Because however long it takes us, we will eventually come back to the mitzvah, the voice that sounded once at Sinai and never ceases to echo in Jewish hearts, telling us that that is why we are Jews. Thank you very much indeed.
Jewish learning is an ongoing process and must carry on after educational conferences. In concluding the 1996 Encounter Conference, Chief Rabbi Sachs urged delegates to use the inspiration of the conference to continue their Jewish growth through Jewish study. He brought the conference to a close this way.
That really is what today is, a beginning and not an end. And therefore let me end, since somebody challenged us on senses of humor, on my favorite illustration of what seems to be the great Jewish characteristic of chutzpah. And that is the following. It's a story set in those very tense days, just before the creation of the State of Israel, around 46, 47, when relations between the Jews and the Brits wasn't all it might have been. And one particular Jewish activist from the Haganah, we call him Chaim, was imprisoned by the British, and his wife, who was left all alone in the Moshav, wrote to Chaim as follows. She says, Chaim, I'm really delighted that you have chosen to be a hero, but you got yourself thrown in jail, and in the meanwhile we have a farm to run. The time has come to dig the ground and plant potatoes. There's nobody here to do it, and you had to be a hero. How am I supposed to plant the potatoes? Chaim writes his wife the following note. Dear Miriam, whatever you do, don't dig the ground. There are rifles buried underneath. The latter is intercepted by the British military authority. The next morning, the farm is overrun by soldiers. They dig up every square inch of ground. They do not find one single rifle. Disconsolate, they return to base. Chaim writes to Miriam, Miriam, now plant a potato.